Hey everybody, it's Christian Buckley doing another MVP Buzz Chat, and I'm talking today with Tiffany. Hello.
Hello, hello.
So Tiffany, I know we've known each other for a long time. It's this that sounds so bad but you're in that group of people that I think when I left Microsoft and started went to that first conference in Vegas in 2009 as I went to the earlier ones, but as an employee, but to go to the SharePoint conference in Vegas in 2009, where I met like dozens of people that are still like some of my closest friends in the community to this day.
Yeah, I
And I
try I
Yeah.
try not to exaggerate. I think I was one of the first 100 SharePoint people on Twitter. But
Oh,
let's just say I was one of the first 1,000. But I remember the very first SharePoint conference. Um, and so that's how long I've been around. So I started as a Microsoft software trainer in 1997.
oh, yeah.
I was a training manager at Gateway Computers until the turn of the century. And then that was then I took a break to try to become a stand up comedian. Clearly, that did not
Oh,
work out.
okay.
And in 2002, Microsoft hired me to do the tips and tricks going across the country. We were doing Office 2003 tips and tricks. We wrote a book. The person who created that program, him and I wrote a book that ended up being a launch title for Office 2007, and we were introducing a new thing called SharePoint.
That's very exciting. Well, I'd say,
Yeah.
do you know what LinkedIn member number you are?
Oh, that's funny. Is it just in my URL? How would I
It
know that?
used to be. No, they took it out. It's a bit buried. Like every time I forget, or somebody asks me that question, I say if you go and look it up, there's people that have written articles or LinkedIn posts that
Yeah,
walk you through how to find it. Yeah, it
yeah.
used to be in your URL. They took it out. Yeah, so I am LinkedIn number 6,551.
Wow, that
So
is a very
very early.
small number.
But yeah, so it's kind of cool for folks that didn't know that. There's how many people are on there now? Is it close to a billion, or is
Oh,
it,
I'm sure.
something like
Yeah,
that?
yeah.
I was always asked. So, you've already started to introduce yourself. So, but where are you and where do you work today?
Okay, so I am with Avanade. I'm a group manager at Avanade. Primarily, what I do is I solution modern workplace deals. So that could be anything from SharePoint migrations, modernizations. It could be a rollout to Viva Suite, and then of course what everybody is talking about for the last year. Avanade was we were client zero for Copilot, so I've been working in Copilot for a full year.
So I have to ask because the way that Microsoft, when they made changes, and some folks may not be aware of this, like Microsoft had and they changed titles all the time, but essentially they're like the PFEs, all of the infield people, they changed titles and they went from horizontal to vertical. Is Avanade like that too? Or do you focus on specific industries?
Not yet.
Hmm.
But we follow what Accenture does.
Okay.
So Accenture just said that they were going to have a North America region. We haven't gotten official word. I have no idea, but I would assume that in the next year or two, we will just follow what Accenture does. So we have a parallel um, uh, structure as far as a managing director at Accenture, as a senior director or a director at Avanade. So we do have that structure. Um, but we aren't in verticals yet. I see that we have some people who specialize in healthcare, but for the most part, it's loose.
Yeah.
Like I do a lot in resources because I live in Houston, but I'm not officially assigned to only do resources accounts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to look at I've never been, worked for a large consulting company. I've always been with product companies
Mhm.
primarily. And while I do like my independent stuff, but it's just very, very different from all of this. And it's just always interesting to look at that structure. And I know where it was odd to see people that were broad across multiple, technology areas get kind of filtered down to a couple core things, and then to move from horizontal across all the industries, depending on what the workload was, to have to focus on different verticals. But it makes sense to
Right.
have the depth of experience. Like if you're healthcare and develop that expertise in healthcare versus supply chain or oil and gas or whatever that is.
Well, because a lot of times, at least in the sales cycle, you can imagine people want case studies from their industry.
Right.
So it just makes sense for me to know what other energy companies are doing, because everybody, once one does it and is successful, they all kind of have to do it.
Right. Well, and I certainly saw that with SharePoint. And no, because I had that experience joining when I joined Microsoft in 2006, for example. I had background because I had past clients that were in high tech electronics. I worked in the supply chain space as well as oil and gas from other projects I worked on. And so I was able to go meet with sales teams at Microsoft, and being a SharePoint person, answer questions and jump on calls and actually share contacts that I had in some of these companies were some of the early adopters of SharePoint in those industries. But yeah, it's an exciting, interesting space to go and look at that. Now, let me ask you, because I know we've known each other a long time. You've been in the community, and Tiffany is a prime example for folks that don't know her of one of those people where everybody went, wait, you weren't already an MVP? Like,
No.
I could have sworn. And in fact, I don't know if you even had that in your conversation. Like, I almost like said when you said no, I'm not, and I was like, no, yes, you are. Like, I almost argued
As
with
if
you
you could
on
just will it into
that.
existence. And
Uh,
actually, this is funny. I think he'll remember this conversation, but Mark Rackley and I had a conversation before he was an MVP. And we were going back and forth on the pros and cons.
hmm,
And back then, to get MVP, it was more about, are you on the forums, right? Are you contributing, content? So it felt like a very small, like, and I was like, I'm not doing the forums. And I'm going to say it out loud. I was like, I'm not working for Microsoft for free. I'm just not going
right.
to do it.
Yeah, yeah.
And so in my mind, there wasn't a plus side to being MVP. At that time, it's something you went for. So here's what happened. So years and years go by, I do whatever I'm going to do. And Sharon Weaver said to me, she said it in a way that it finally clicked. And she says, if you're doing it anyway, why not just allow them to reward you for it? So it
Yeah.
moved from that attitude of working for Microsoft for free to, I'm going to do this anyway. Like, this is just who I am and it's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And then, but as far as the path went, Sandy Yu nominated me first, and then she lost her MVP before I could get all my stuff in. But that's what got me started on figuring out what counted. And then actually putting the spreadsheet together where you say, okay, this is what I did. This is the category it falls into, right? I think just everybody has a simple spreadsheet. And then Zoe Wilson, without even talking to me, nominated me. And she's like, you've got 90 days.
Yeah.
Like, when
Yeah.
an executive at Avanade says, and someone of Zoe's caliber says, you're going to be an MVP, how can I resist? So
Yeah.
I still, though, didn't think I was going to get it because Copilot really is so new. And
Mhm.
I don't want to tell on myself so that they take it away, but I didn't quite have a full year of Copilot posts. What saved me was that I was still doing posts for SharePoint and
Right.
SharePoint Premium.
Right.
So they gave me both. They gave me SharePoint and Copilot.
Well, that's something. And as I interview folks, I mean, it too is that, yeah, you do need to have a primary focus, and they are looking at like the last year, the
Yeah.
last 12 months of activity that kind of counts towards that. But there are other strategic reasons. I mean, it is a black box, like you said. It used to be heavily weighted on the forums. Like, I don't do anything out in the forums. It's just not what I do. I'm plenty busy with other stuff. Uh, so there's multiple ways that you can give back. I met a woman at the MVP summit, and she's been part of the series. who only does the forums. That's it.
Oh, yeah.
And so she was talking about getting ready for her first presentation. She was wanted some feedback and some ideas around starting a blog. I'm like, are you creating videos? Like, no, I'm not really like a YouTube video creation person. I'm like, so like, what are you doing? And well, it's more than just the forums. Forums number one, but then she started contributing to code samples and building things, getting involved in the community that way, which is huge. But yeah, I mean, there's all different paths, but what is consistent is having a primary focus. You can have secondary, tertiary focus areas. We all do. You can write about and do whatever you want out
And
there.
it sounds like you can change them too. Like if
Oh yeah,
I, like last year, if I would have gone for it last year, it would have been everything with Viva, right?
right,
So what I like about it is it really is brand new every year.
right,
So whatever you focused on the year before, it seems to me like they like I'm not stuck here. Like what you were talking about at the beginning. I'm not stuck here. If I decide I want to go in a different direction, then I think they would be supportive of that.
right. And it's I mean, obviously there are products that Microsoft discontinues. I was thinking
Yeah, Viva Topics, thank you very much.
yeah. Well, I was thinking even in a bigger flame out, like the expressions suite for
Oh,
folks that
wow.
remember. That was that for folks that don't know, that was like the Adobe Compete, like their poor man's Photoshop
Yep.
and all the rest of the stuff. But yeah, I mean but that's something that, yeah, because the technology changes, our interests change, evolve,
Mhm.
and change around that. I mean, but ultimately it is up to the product team. You may say, hey, I'm doing more and more SharePoint. I want to do that. And they may then say, well, we're kind of de-emphasizing. I'm not saying that this is what I'm using this as an example. I'm
Right,
illustrating a point, people. Nothing's happening to SharePoint.
right.
But that they may say, we don't need as many MVPs in the SharePoint area. What else you got? Kind
Yeah.
of thing. But yeah, I mean, otherwise it's wide open.
And the other thing, I don't know if this is the right time to transition, but the other thing I've noticed is conferences now that MVPs are starting to produce conferences, the topics are a bit more diverse. So, for example, so that's one of my big pushes for the year is to really try to focus on accessibility at conferences.
Yep.
And then, I mean, always diversity. There's usually always a women in tech, but I really want to focus on persons of color. I want to call people out when the panel is not diverse, right? Like, but I want to help. I don't just
Yeah.
want to call them out. I want to say, here's a list of 10 people, right, who can speak to this topic and, would be happy to travel to the event. So that's like a big thing for me. But what's been interesting is, so for example, and I'm going to mention her again, Sandy Yu does a digital nomad thing. It has nothing necessarily to do with SharePoint, right? But it is an interesting topic to think. I'm going to sell my house and I'm going to travel the world and I'm going to work from the road. And that's interesting to people. So
Yeah.
again, if I want to do, an LGBTQ diversity panel,
Mhm.
I think we're at a spot where that could get accepted now.
Yeah.
So it's not just I think that's what is so interesting to me about community. If community is important, then that means we need to give people a sense of belonging.
Well,
One way to belong is with technology, but there are other ways to let people know that they're welcome.
there on that point, well, a couple things I was going to say, so on that point, I mean, I do like how some conferences, larger conferences, are incorporating. As these are tech conferences that are incorporating business and soft skill topics in. Like I'm a huge fan of ESPC. I've been to every single one back to 2011. It's in Stockholm this year, and they created last year their Inspire stage, which are not technical per se, but more business topics. And it's been just a huge hit. I mean, I
Yeah.
sat there and watched a number of sessions on topics that just like this is fantastic and made connections because of that. And So I'm doing a topic on that, but I'm doing so the TechCon 365 in Dallas. I'm
Mhm.
doing multiple business topics. I'll talk a little about technology in there, but they're business topics.
Yeah, Christy Roberson got accepted at ARMA InfoCon to do Bring Your Own Chair, which is based off of a book and a quote, and it's about diversity in tech. So even non-Microsoft conferences, we're starting to see more of these soft skills, and I think that goes back to something you're really good at and something I'm passionate about, and that's just mentoring. So
Mhm.
showing people that there is an entry point, because the hardest thing to do when you're mentoring somebody to speak is they blank out on what they could talk about.
Yeah.
And it's like, what are you passionate about? What do you know better than most people? Like, and you just start giving them questions until they can finally, put something together. And then now, of course, we have Copilot to write our abstracts, which is fantastic.
Yep. Well, one of my sessions in Dallas is actually on building a mentoring program. So whether
Oh, I love it.
internally or for community around that, so a lot of experience in that space as well. Well, let
Yeah.
me that. So you've got kind of your origin story around this. What are your community activities like? What's going on down in Houston, and what are you doing more regionally?
Yeah. So ARMA InfoCon is in Houston this year. So of course I'll do that. I'm going to go on ahead and take my new MVP status and try to submit to EPC. I've never, I don't know. I did a conference in Canada once, but
Hmm.
I don't really have like an international, kind of a presence. So, I want to kind of focus on that. So conferences are my big thing. I love speaking. I love presenting. But then also, yeah, mentoring. I'm gonna continue to blog around Copilot, of course, and I do that off of the LinkedIn platform.
Hmm.
And then, I mean, eventually, I'm gonna have to podcast again. So it's real. And again, I
Gonna
think I'll
have to.
probably,
Yep, gonna have
yeah,
to.
eventually I'll have to do that. So yeah, so I'll be working on that for the next maybe 30 to 60 days before I decide kind of what that's going to look like. But mostly, I don't know, maybe somebody will come back and tell me I'm wrong, but there's not a lot of community in Houston. Like I feel pretty isolated here. And maybe there's one or two people in Austin. Dallas has a bigger presence, but maybe what I just need to do is try to build the community here.
You know what's crazy is that, do you remember for years the battle for the largest SharePoint Saturdays was Houston
With
and
Houston.
Minneapolis, and
Yeah,
both of them were at somewhere between like 800 and 1,000 attendees. They were
yeah,
huge.
yeah, yeah. And then it just tanked. So and it never really came back. So, but how I interpret that is it was no longer needed, right?
Right.
Enough people
Yep.
knew about SharePoint, enough people like how were you going to keep it fresh and engaging? And so there were fewer new people, right? And that's what a user group is typically dedicated to. And it gets harder the more you know to go back and teach a fundamentals class, right? Because
Yep.
then you say too much and it gets overwhelming, right?
Right.
So I think it's a particular skill. You either have to be a new person doing a fundamental topic, or you have to be really good at going back to the beginning for people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm still on the board of like my regional the user group, and the numbers are down, and the interests are diverse. I mean, we're now talking about merging with a couple other user groups. We're talking about for an annual event merging three into one
Yeah.
just to get the bigger audience. And part of that is just because of the just to put on an event. If you're not an organizer of an event, like you have to have the sponsors, and if the sponsorships are drying up because again it's a smaller footprint
Hmm.
um, around those specialty topics. So do a broader set of topics. In theory, pull in a larger
Well,
audience.
and that's what's so tough. And I'll call out sponsors here. Sponsors only want to sponsor where a business decision maker is going to be. And in a user group, you're not going to get business decision makers. So you really have to find companies. And I would say maybe companies that have more of a focus on hiring, right? Where they could maybe treat it as a recruitment kind of event. So we still will have people sponsored from like staffing companies. But no, I'll call out the sponsors to say, listen, I mean, I get it because there's a lot of pressure. Now that I'm on this side of it, there's so much pressure to follow up with people after conferences.
Mhm.
And I'm like, you're just not getting it. Like, I get it, but I don't get it because it's very difficult to get business out of a conference, or it always was for me when I had my own consulting firm. And so, but you don't do it for business, you do it for community, you do it to meet a need, you do it to because you want people to succeed and you believe that a rising tide raises all boats. Like
Right.
it has to be part of your value system. And
Yeah.
I don't think conferences are part of a corporate value system anymore.
Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, look, something needs to change, but it also, as a marketing guy, I would say, like, look, we as organizers of events, we need to change the marketing mix. We need to adjust, the reasons, do some different things. So it needs to be fresh. It needs to be of value for both attendees as well as the sponsors, and then you need to sell them on that vision. But
You know who we may want to look to is SIM, which is Society of Information Managers. And they have a system where you can only be a member if you report directly to the CIO. But then they have subgroups like SIM Women, and anyone can participate in that. And I wonder if we could get more sponsors if we focused it around we're going to have an executive lunch and you can sponsor the executive lunch. And then the attendees theoretically would be the people who report to those executives. It's like you said, we're just going to have to start getting creative.
yeah, and one way of doing, I just thought of this too, would be, and anybody please use this idea, but of doing, if you're doing those smaller events, like we got this annual event, if we make as part of the sponsorship, like come sponsor this targeted lunch, it costs a little bit more for the sponsorship, but part of the proceeds of that go towards their automatic base level sponsorship of the annual event, and they're on that
Absolutely.
list. So you can
Yeah.
get creative to do things that are unique value proposition for the sponsors, but help you fund that larger community effort later.
And I know the other thing that we really rely on when we do joint events with Microsoft is Microsoft helps us, right, with that marketing and says, okay, we're going to have these people from these companies who are going to be here, and then we know who to bring in, to be able to talk with them and enhance that relationship. So I wonder if maybe that isn't something else to say, maybe a conference just needs to start targeting companies, right? And
Well,
to tell
yeah.
sponsors, here are the companies who are going to attend.
So yes, and some have done a better job than others around doing that. I will say that there's a little bit. I kind of smirked a little as you said that, because a lot of event organizers, a lot of community people that just assume, hey, we're doing this event around Microsoft technology, and where there's mostly like there's MVPs involved, all the community user groups that Microsoft will help and support. No,
What's their motivation, right?
right, right.
There's
I mean,
200 people at that event. What's their
even
motivation?
even if going to the local people and saying, hey, look, there's a lot of your customers that are going to be here as well as prospect customers, but what helps us is, for if you just got the word out somehow, we're not
Right.
asking for an email blast, but the months leading up to, let your customer lists in the region know this is going on and encourage them to go. And it's
That's
even
what we need.
that's been a battle.
We need Microsoft. Here's what we need from you. We need, just like they have people who are focused on the partner community, maybe we need people at Microsoft who are focused from a digital sales perspective on community events to
Well,
answer exactly
you
those
have
questions.
the MGCI, which is supposed to do part of that, and so it's the
Oh,
Microsoft Global Community uh,
oh,
Initiative. So,
I
and
should.
there's the board and the things that are out there. So it's all the people, like Rackley is a regional director on that, or he's on the board or something. And
Mhm.
so that's something that Caruana Timu and Heather Cook like put together, and is out there and going. And so that's something that continues to evolve and change. There is that path. But I'll tell you, my being on the first version of that board a few years back, I used to have the plaque that I got to as part of that. But still, the feedback has been to get the regional Microsoft teams, like here in Utah, we've got a sales office. It's like 10 minutes away from me. In fact, if I walk my dog, look across the river on the other side of the hill, I can see the building with their logo. But their sales office, like there's a complete disconnect from that standpoint. So yeah, I think we have to set expectations that the salespeople, unless you know them personally and can impress upon them to get involved,
Mhm.
in the 12 years that we've had our regional event here, 1 year we had some of the core local Microsoft people show up. One
I have
time.
clients who don't even know who their Microsoft rep is. How am I supposed to figure that out?
Right.
You know?
So, but anyway, I mean, there is that initiative. It's a great way to, so there is some involvement and potentially some funds to help sponsor an event in a region. And so definitely go look at, for folks watching MGCI, if you're an organizer within your community, that's somebody that you can reach out to and find out more information. And it truly is global. There are regional leads all over the place.
Or we just start charging for events and see what happens.
That's another strategy. That's another strategy. But
Mhm.
yeah, anyway, we could do a whole session on just ideas for organizing events. And I've got thoughts, and I'm trying to convince the rest of my board to make some changes. And if they don't agree, that I'm even thinking about just going on it my own
Yeah.
again and doing a different type of event. But
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
I
I'm
will.
here.
One last thing I will say is that, because we started talking about doing the events, is something that is highly valued as a contribution it's for MVPs is organizing user groups and events. That
Mhm.
that it's, I don't know, the weighted scoring that is, they like that kind of community building, like literal community building, is one of the highest weighted
Yeah.
contributions you can make to the community, and they love that.
Yeah. Love it.
So, what about Tiffany? I know it's great seeing you and catching up. There's so much more we can talk about. I'm going to see you a couple more times this year, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But for folks that want to reach out and connect with you, where are you the most active in social? Where can they find you?
Definitely on LinkedIn. So I'm Tiffany Songvilay, like you're singing a song, Songvilay. And that's where I do almost all of my. I'm very rarely on X anymore. But definitely on LinkedIn.
What about the Book of Faces? Are you there active?
I am, but I'm very protective. I don't allow family or work people, like, yeah, because I want to be able to complain and not have any backlash. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So yeah, so
I'm
I
doing
don't
more and
do
more
professional.
community stuff because there are great communities over there. There are M365 groups that have tens of thousands of members.
Wow.
And so
So I could do that. I could do Facebook groups, but I'm not gonna like
yeah,
accept a Facebook invite from some random listener of this
right.
podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. Neither am I. All right. Anyway, well, Tiffany, great connecting.
Thanks so much.